All right, hello everyone and welcome to Vaadin webinars. This week's topic will be about HTML table and improving it, making it better. Together with me here I have Leif, head of our framework development.
Hello.
And like always, you can ask questions there on the forum. So there is a forum thread especially for this webinar. So go there, have a discussion. I will be following it here. And we can answer your questions live here in the webinar. All right, let's get started.
Yes.
First of all, let's take a look at the history part of the table. So we are talking about grid here, we are talking about table here, and we are talking about HTML table here. And basically we are mostly meaning the same thing, but the reason is historical. So if you think Vaadin as a framework, one of the key features in this kind of UI framework is the presenting data. And presenting data, the HTML table has been the fundamental thing since forever.
Since beginning of
Since the beginning of time. And in the framework, it has been there in the beginning of time, basically. The first version was purely HTML using XSLT. So I think it was something like HTML3, and we converted that on the server side, the data to HTML3 table and rendered that to browser. That was the basic thing. So it already presented the same data that it's doing today, but it was only on pure HTML format.
Yeah, but that was like 12 years ago.
That was like 12 years ago, yeah. And it was the only. It wasn't very interactive if you think it, because every time you did something, you had to refresh the whole page anyway. So you didn't have a very sophisticated communication there.
Yeah, but that was what browsers at that time provided.
That's true. So that was the state of the art. It changed at late 2005 when there was technology called Ajax introduced. Yeah. That was a cool thing. You could render a sub page there nicely, and you could actually have much more interactive applications in web. And really, I think that's the way it still is. So it's using XHR communication between client and a server, and you render a lot of data there in a table. We have next iteration in 2007 when we met Google Web Toolkit, or GWT as it's called today. And that was basically a client-side rewrite for us. So it was, we got rid of the JavaScript part and back to the Java world we know best. And now we could use that also on the client side. It didn't completely help us, I think, because we had to do a major rewrite there in Vaadin 7.
Yeah, okay, that rewrite was not because of table, it was because in Vaadin 7 we made it.
Yeah, so the communication changed quite a lot, so it actually forced us to do a rewrite on a table also. But it made sense. It came better.
Yeah, and actually the table was not really rewritten at that point. It was just refactored so that some parts of the communication was separated out, but still there was quite much that was still left there.
Yeah. But overall, if you think of this, it's basically the same component. It has just seen a lot of iterations there during the time.
And is it basically so that the server-side API is still the same as it was in 2002?
Yes, so I think that it has been surprisingly stable since 2002.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's where we are currently. Now we are on the verge of planning a new way of rendering data there on the client side.
Yeah.
And maybe we can talk a little bit about that one.
Yeah, because actually the background here is that after all these like rewrites and refactoring and adapting to new communication structures and everything, and also adding features along the way, the current table code is quite messy. It's
I haven't checked that for a while, but I can imagine. So.
Yeah, you won't be surprised when you find that the same Java method does like DOM updates, catches some events, calculates some sizes, sends some message to the server, and also like moves data back and forth. So everything is kind of, everything is just like, there's no structure in it anymore. It has outgrown its.
Even though the server side is pretty much the same, the client side has a lot of functionality in it.
So, So what we are doing now is actually that we decided that, hey, now we really begin from scratch. We throw out everything, all the code, take the good parts of the API, the good, like those ideas that we have learned that are actually useful, and all the rest we like reimagine, do it again. So that involves things like arranging things in the browser in a new way, so that like for instance, so it works better with touch devices, like mobile devices that usually don't have that much or that good performance because they are like battery powered and so on. And also just like things in the API, for instance, table is really confusing. We have this get value method. Sometimes it returns the ID of the selected row. Sometimes it returns a collection of IDs of selected rows. So that's also like the kind of things that we can
change now.
Can do in a better way now when we really start from the beginning.
Right.
And I guess we could continue by actually showing what this looks like today.
So this is what you're currently doing for
this is really bleeding edge. This even contains a couple of small tweaks that I have only made locally on my development environment.
Okay, that's real.
So it's really bleeding edge, just some small like cosmetical fixes and that kind of stuff.
Okay, but it looks like a table again.
It looks like a table component. It uses the beautiful Valo theme, of course, and of course the main feature is that you can have data. It's lazy loaded, but okay, now this is just running from my local machine, so it's so fast that you don't even realize that
there is no spinner or anything like that.
And actually the actual scrolling is still like really fast. That's one big improvement from the old table. Of course, if the network is too slow, you still get like placeholder data.
Right.
Or empty data, but the like scrolling when there is data is...
So the same lazy loading mechanism is still there, so it's pulling out data from...
But then we also have added lots of these features that users were wishing for. So one, as you can see here, we have like in this demo, 3 rows of headers. And actually one row contains like formatting and multiple or one cell spans multiple columns. And then also we have here like filtering controls, so we can do like live filtering here if we want to.
Is it built in there?
Actually, the filtering is not built in that way, because what we have seen is that everyone wants to do the UI part of the filtering different ways.
Millions of ways of filtering.
So what we do is that the like data-centered API for filtering stuff, that's actually the same as in the table. And then you can just like add whatever components you want to the headers, and in that way you can for instance add your filtering boxes there.
Okay, and maybe have your own filtering syntax even or something.
If you want to implement something like that, you're free to do it. Then another feature that we have added that was also something that quite often was like implemented custom for each project is that we now have like checkboxes for selecting rows, which is much more user-friendly than the old convention of like holding control pressed and clicking the following rows.
True.
And the last new feature I would want to highlight here that's also very, very wished for is that now you can also freeze some columns so that they don't scroll sideways. So now when I scroll sideways...
So you have fixed columns, yes.
These leftmost columns are are still like in view, but the rest are.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Actually, here's also one more feature.
Yeah. What's that?
Yeah. So we have also made it easier to customize what's inside the actual table. So what's in these cells. So this is just like floating point value showing like how much of these imaginary products, books, are in stock right now. So in that way, we just like say that, hey, this is a number, but you should display it like in this way.
Yeah.
So instead of having the just printing the number as a string,
Yeah,
we show
yeah,
it
you
in
can
this
have
way.
something very visual there.
Yeah, and this is then, of course, you can configure it in different ways.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah, it looks good.
that's what it looks like.
Okay, so is there something changed internally? Probably. So
Everything is changed internally.
Okay, can we take a look at that a little bit?
Sure, we can. One thing still about like the ideas here.
Yeah.
Like there's basically two ways of making a table component from a like usability point of view. One is this that we have with like infinite scrolling. You just keep, or not infinite, but you just keep continuously scrolling and scrolling through the data. The other approach is paging.
Yeah.
So that you have like these next page, previous page buttons. We generally believe that in most cases this kind of scrolling is better for the user experience. But if you want, you can also, with some small customization, it should be possible to make Grid also use paging.
Use paging as a data. Yeah. Yeah, I think that paging comes from the data sources many times. So you have the page data source, which are easy to integrate. So.
Actually, you have a database when you just do like selects and 15 rows at a time or something like that. But so as I said, the key focus is really the data. And I think a good way of showing how this all works is to actually see what happens like with the data when we scroll in this table. So the first thing that happens is that we have something in the DOM. The browser says that, hey, now the user has scrolled, so that more data, or basically the user has scrolled. That's what the browser tells us. And then the first level we have implemented is really a low-level rendering engine, basically. We call it escalator. Because it really kind of works like an escalator.
Okay, yeah.
But it's really stupid. It doesn't know anything else than scrolling.
Yeah. Okay. So.
But there's.
That's what the escalators do. They scroll.
They scroll around. Yeah. So basically, what happens is that the browser tells escalator that, hey, now we have scrolled. Escalator sees that, oh, it seems that row 15 needs to be shown now. Yeah. And then it makes sure that like there's somewhere to put the data of row 15. But escalator itself doesn't know anything about the actual data.
Okay, so it's just requesting itself.
Yeah. So it actually requests the data from Grid.
Okay.
And when it requests the data, it actually says that like here is the DOM elements where this data should be added. So it says that like in this element should be the first column from row 15, second column, and so on. So Grid gets this list of elements.
Yeah.
And then Grid doesn't know anything about data.
Okay.
Because the data is something that you implement.
Yeah.
So Grid instead asks a data source that, hey, can I get row 15, please?
Okay.
And then the data source gives Grid some kind of object that is like the data of row 15.
Right. Is this now on the server side, the data source?
This is, now we are only talking about the client side. Okay. We'll come back to the server side.
So we have a client side data source here.
Yeah. The client side data source, it can fetch data from a server, or it can use local data. So any option is possible there. But what happens, yes, the Grid gets some kind of row object back. Grid doesn't know anything about the insides of that row object, and the data source doesn't need to know actually either. It's just like one row.
Yeah.
So then what happens next is that for each column that grid is configured with, it says to that column that, hey, here's a row data, here's a cell that the data should be in, please do something.
Yeah.
And what the column does is that it sees that, okay, I don't know how to show the data, but I know how to grab data for this column from a row. So that's what it does.
Yeah.
So it does something like if your data,
thing.
yeah, if your data object is like it's a Java bean, it's a book object.
Yeah.
So then one column implementation, all it does is basically it does book.get title.
Okay. Yeah.
And then it takes that title, passes it along to a renderer, and it also passes the element that grid gave it. So now we have a renderer that gets this one specific piece of data and a DOM element where that data should be displayed. And then the renderer actually, in some way or another, puts that data into the DOM.
So that's actually where the magic happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in this way, like, we have lots of independent parts that only know how to do one thing.
Yeah, yeah. But sounds pretty much clear architecture that you described before. So
yeah.
So this is very cool. And I guess that this also makes the DOM manipulation much more controlled there. So
yeah, so there's only two parts that control the DOM. Escalator that sets up the structure.
Yeah.
And then renderers that populate the content into that structure.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's how things work on that account.
But this was all on client side. So this was a client side architecture you were describing here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And actually, with all this done, the server side part is quite easy.
Yeah.
Because we'll get to that.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. But I think next we should take a even deeper look about what Escalator actually does, because Escalator is like, it's the thing we need actually.
Yeah, okay, I see the two things there, the escalator and renderer, which are the fundamental things there.
Yeah.
So the escalator is the...
Yeah. So actually Escalator, what this does, this is really, we have made it so quick that we can reasonably make it. There's lots of like, in a naive implementation of something like this, there's lots of overhead that just happens. So what we see here is that we have like we have a really small grid here with just like 2.5 rows visible.
Yeah, very typical.
Yeah. And when we scroll like this, okay, so some rows disappear above and some rows come into view from below.
Yeah.
So actually what we have is that like those rows would then be there.
Yeah, yeah. So we only see a small portion.
Yeah, and we just move like which part of that is shown.
It's shown. Yeah.
But this is, of course, there's lots of overhead here that we can eliminate, because this would actually, what if there are like 1,000 rows in the database? Then we don't want to have all those.
It doesn't scale anymore. So.
No. So the first thing to do is that we get rid of all the rows that are not visible.
Okay.
So now the experience is already much smoother, because the browser has so much less to take into account when like calculating exactly what's on the screen.
Yeah, yeah.
So now we get a problem though, or problem. The next step, we scroll a little bit up again.
Yeah.
Now this row 2 is not displayed anymore. It's useless. Let's get rid of it. Let's continue scrolling. Now we suddenly realize that, hey, we need row 6 here. Right. So then we can create row 6.
Yeah.
And now we're ready
on the
to
fly.
scroll.
Yeah.
On the fly.
Yeah.
When we see that, hey, now we will need it, then we just could add it.
Yeah.
But this is still lots of overhead.
Yeah.
Because creating and destroying these rows is also quite expensive.
Yeah.
So the trick we can do is instead, when row 3 is not needed anymore, instead of throwing it away and then later on creating row 7, we actually reuse it.
As an element?
Yes.
You take the same element?
We can take the element, put it like at the bottom of the line, update the data, and then we're ready to go.
I think it's easy to see where the name escalator came from.
Yes.
Or was it the other way around? The name was first and then the idea next?
No, it was first it was the idea, and then we kept like these moving rows around, should it do this, should it do that, and then someone says that wouldn't it be easier to just call it, say, an escalator, because that's how
what
works.
it's doing there.
Yeah, and then the name stuck.
Okay, good.
But still, we're still doing some overhead here, because actually like moving those elements also causes overhead, because like when you, from the browser's point of view, actually when you like move it so that they are like, when you change the order of elements in the DOM, that's also lots of things the browser needs to like recalculate, see that how does this affect other elements, how does it affect styles, because you might have styles that says like the fifth child element should have special style or something.
So there will be a DOM reflow completely or something. Yeah.
So still we can optimize this one step further, and this is really where the magic happens. So now again, when we have row 4 here that is now not used, but we want to reuse it. So instead of really like moving it on a DOM level, we keep it there and just tell the browser that row 4 is there above row 5, but visually you should show it like a couple of pixels down, or a couple of tens of pixels down.
Okay.
So it's still like the browser sees it there like above row 5, but actually visually it's below there. So we actually, we update the data as well. So this means that we're really lean.
So this is not affecting to the DOM structure in any way.
No,
it's just changing the visual positioning of it.
Yes, only the visual positioning changes. And the really cool thing here is that when this happens, we can tell the browser, or at least modern browsers, we can tell that it should treat each row as a separate like picture that it can send to the GPU.
Right.
So then when we scroll, the only thing the browser needs to do is to say that, hey, this picture that you already know, move it a couple of pixels up.
Yeah.
And that's all that needs to be done. This is something that modern hardware is really good at doing really quickly.
Yeah, and I guess that the mobile devices are optimized for this kind of thing.
Yes. Yeah. Actually, all browsers do not support this kind of trickery. So for those, we still just use like conventional like absolute positioning.
Right.
But these like modern browsers, they all support this. So So it's really fast. Actually, there's even on some platforms you can see that the browser is cheating in that way, that if you scroll really quickly and have lots of columns, it can't really keep up with the pace.
Yeah.
So what you see is actually that new rows appear from below, but they still have the old content. And then a split second later, the browser updates the content of that row.
Yeah.
Because then it only like updates the picture that the GPU shows.
Yeah.
And that happens slightly delayed. So the browser like prioritized the movement.
Yeah.
And then when it has time to catch up, it actually updates
updates content also.
Yes.
Okay. But it sounds like it's very fast.
It's very fast, yes.
Yeah, okay. Have you any numbers of this?
We actually achieved 60 FPS scrolling on basically all platforms.
Okay.
So also like mobile, like iPhones and iPads, and reasonable Android devices.
Well,
actually, turned out,
that's good enough,
in most cases, people think that like Internet Explorer old, like 8 or something, is the worst browser for like performance and that kind of stuff. But in our experience, it was actually like old Android devices, because the challenge with Android is that there's so many quite inexpensive devices with quite modest hardware.
Yeah.
Because like if you get a
cheap phone,
if you get a cheap Android phone today, it has much less like processing power than what an old desktop machine running Internet Explorer 8 has.
Yeah, okay.
So that's the reason why actually like Android from performance point of view has been more challenging.
So technically we are taking steps back on the client device capabilities.
Yes, that's much about what all this talk about mobile is, that suddenly we need to make things slightly simpler, both like performance-wise, but also how UIs are designed, because you really have a small screen.
Right.
You need to choose which is the important content that should be displayed first.
Right. Yeah.
So it really changes the way the web works.
Yeah. True.
So that was really like what Escalator does, how this all scrolling works for you. So this is something that you as a user of Grid never really sees.
Yeah, so it's completely inside. There is no API for this, or
if you want to, you can use Escalator standalone, but then you're completely on your own. Then you
sounds intriguing.
Yeah, it's.
But maybe I keep my hands off it.
Yeah, but Grid internally uses Escalator.
Yeah.
Or you can use Escalator yourself if you really want to.
Yeah. Okay. All right. What else have we there? That was the escalator.
Yeah. Actually, we have the next thing that is also really performance optimization. Because it doesn't help to have scrolling efficient if other things cause overhead. The second thing that causes overhead is really, if you look at this, like what happens to the data. This like getting the data and getting things updated in a DOM, or actually updating things in the DOM, we saw getting data is trivial or something compared to the other things. But actually this part, like what happens, basically how do you customize how the data is displayed?
Right. So the rendering part of it. So.
Yeah, the actual like data rendering part.
Right.
Because the challenge here is that if like the simple way of customizing how the data is shown would be to create a like component or a widget, Vaadin component, or then a Git widget that shows the data in each cell.
Yeah, that has been the way.
Yeah. The problem here is that if you have 10 columns and then you scroll through the data, scroll like 100 rows of data all in all, that's like 10 times 100, that's like 1,000 components that need to be created, initialized, attached, actually rendered by the browser, and then when we scroll them out of view,
it's easy to see it doesn't scale anymore. So
yeah. Like there's memory allocations, that's all these attaching, detaching, and it really slows things down.
Yeah. So you need something lightweight there.
Yeah. So actually what we have then, it's actually like the renderer thing here. What it does is that it's actually like you have one renderer instance for each column. So it's almost a singleton.
Yeah.
So we don't like create new objects on the fly or anything like that.
Yeah.
And then what happens is that the renderer, it like first when Escalator creates those, like say we have 5 rows can be visible at a time. So then Escalator creates those 5 row elements, and then it asks Escalator to like initialize, or it asks the renderer to initialize those rows. So for instance, if you want to show a drop down in every cell, then you can have a renderer that creates an select HTML tag, puts predefined option tags in there with the values that should be available to the user.
Yeah.
And then that is all the time in the DOM. And then when we actually have some data saying that now this option is selected in this row, so then the only thing that needs to be done at this point is that we just update like this one attribute in the HTML saying that now this line is selected.
Yeah, instead of the whole...
Instead of recreating the entire structure all the time.
Right.
So that's how we believe that you should go ahead with like doing data customization or customizing how the data is displayed in a really efficient way.
Yeah.
And this is actually might be familiar to some viewers, because this is how, for instance, the cell table in Git works. So this was a really excellent idea that we like borrowed from them.
Okay, so it's pretty much aligned with that one.
Yeah, though the APIs are slightly different, because we, for instance, wanted to support having widgets inside cells.
So you can have that.
Yes, you can have widgets, but then the architecture is done in such a way that you're actually forced to reuse the same widget instances.
Yeah,
so once
so
again,
only changing the values inside those. Yeah, okay.
Exactly. Whereas like actually from the render you don't even have any good way of attaching and detaching widgets, but instead like the framework, the grid asks you for grid widget instances, as many as are needed, and then grid takes care of attaching those, and then you just get to update the like data that they show.
Yeah. Okay.
So in that way you can have really good performance even while using widgets, although doing like just HTML would be even more efficient.
Yeah, okay. But, okay, this all sounds that it's pretty heavily optimized for a lot of data.
Yes, that's...
So, and where you get a lot of data?
Where you get a lot of data? One easy way to get a lot of data is to hook it up with a Vaadin server.
Yeah, well, of course. Yeah. Okay, you mean the server-side part of it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because that's probably how most Vaadin users, at least today, want to use Grid. They don't really want to interact with things in the browser, but just like configure things from the server and feed the data there. Yeah.
So basically this was my question. So how we have here. This is the client-side architecture here. So, but how does it relate to the server-side part? So so the server-side part, it actually it uses the client-side as is. Yeah.
So it's exactly the same functionality that you would use like if you would program it on the client side. So we reuse actually like the interface kind of thing that are reused is like the data source, renderers, and the actual grid widget. Those all are like on the client side, and then we have this line representing like the communication between the boundary between server and client.
Okay.
So the first step here is that we have a grid on the server as well, a grid class.
Yeah, okay. Two grids.
That talks with the client-side grid.
Yeah.
There's only like configuration saying that, hey, like we have this many columns. This column has this renderer. This column has this height. We have this kind of selection mode enabled and that kind of stuff.
Some metadata basically.
Yeah, configuration and metadata. Then on the server as well, we have like columns. The column, for each column you also define a renderer.
Yeah.
Of course.
Same way.
Yeah, if you don't do anything, you get a plain text renderer that just takes a string value from the data source and shows it as a string. Yeah. But you can pick some other renderer as well. And it actually so that like these renderers are they are communicating independently of the grid. And this, among other things, means that you can create your own renderers that like create the client-side renderer and then a server-side API for like configuring and using that renderer.
Okay.
But still there's no data moving here either. This is also just like configuration data moving to the client. So when we come to data, when you like scroll, when you get to like escalator asking grid and grid asking the data source for a row, what happens then when you're using Vaadin server side is that there's this data provider. This is really like hidden from the actual application developer as well. Yeah. But it is there as an independent part. So that one then talks with the Vaadin container.
That sounds more familiar.
Yeah, that's the one that actually contains the data. So you actually still configure the container through grid, but then grid says that, hey, data provider, use this container.
Yeah.
But still all the like data flows, or actually like sending data and requesting data, that's something that data provider and data source does independently of grid. Because one thing that has caused many problems with table is that like configuration and data is sent at the same time.
Yeah.
Because when you used to scroll in the old Vaadin table, what happened was that it sent like message to the server that, hey, I want some data, and then it was like waiting for the data. So then if in the meantime you also configured something in the table, then instead of receiving the data, the client-side implementation received that configuration update, and then it was confused. So this, it works now, yes. I don't think there are any known issues right now, but there have been lots of problems with this.
Yeah.
So every new feature
from this one
caused some regressions to this and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, but now we have like completely independent communication for these two.
Yeah.
Actually, the last thing that is missing here is that your renderer also gets to see the data before it's sent. So if the client-side renderer expects the data in a specific format, then the server-side part of the renderer can actually modify that data before it's sent.
Okay. If you have any questions there online, if you want to ask something from us about this, please do so on the forum thread. For me, it sounds that there are lots of good things going on. What about the API there? So we are talking about grid instead of table, for example. Is that the only change here? Container was there, but...
Container is the same, yeah. It's only grid and table changes, and like the basic concepts, especially on the server, are still the same. So there's like, you have this container, you have item IDs, you have property IDs, you configure your columns, you set the like header text for the columns, and those kind of things are still like the same concepts, and whenever it makes sense, it's also the exact same API. But then for things where we have done things differently, the API has changed.
Yeah, for example, reusing those components. I think it's something that have side effects on your code also.
Yeah, actually we don't even support having components in the data section of the grid.
Right.
So it's only in the headers.
Right.
Because there's a rough idea about how this would work. It's really like, basically lazy loading components is really tricky stuff, and we have chosen to not do that at this point, but instead focus on other features. Because we believe that renderers should let you do all the things that you would previously have needed components
for. Yeah, it sounds like a lightweight component in a sense.
It's kind of a lightweight component. Yeah, that's one good way of putting it.
Yeah. We did have some questions beforehand from you guys, so should we take those?
Yeah, sure.
At this point, let's have a look. So the first question is from Martin Lopez. Is there really plans to completely rewrite the table component? I think you answered here.
Yes, I answered that. The one thing that should also be mentioned is that the table component is not going away soon.
Yeah.
So it's like...
That's good.
Yeah, one thing that is for sure is that table component will still be usable, will be kept like functioning for the entire life cycle of Vaadin 7.
So they live side by side in the framework.
So that means basically that there's like, at the very, very minimum, we have like formally promised to maintain Vaadin 7 and by extension also the table component for at least 3 years. We don't say that in exactly 3 years we will stop it, but at least 3 years. That's a formal promise that is documented on our web page, for instance.
All right. Jan is asking about, will this be backported to 7.3? So for background of this, the plan is that this will be released in 7.4 of version of Vaadin. So what about 7.3 version?
7.3, it won't be backported. If you really, really want to do it, you could almost backport it. Grid actually depends on a couple of framework level features that are coming in Vaadin 7.4. For instance, one thing is that previously, Vaadin 7.3 and older, whenever there's any communication with the server, the framework can't know that nothing has changed that affects layouting, which means that whenever there has been communication, the framework needs to take a small pause, check that are all sizes still up to date, do we need to update some layouts or something. So this is one feature we have added to the framework, so that if the communication is like marked as completely non-visual, which for instance happens when grid or the data source just asks for more data. So in those cases, the framework knows that it doesn't need to do any layouting.
Right.
So in that way,
optimize that part.
Yeah, actually, without that patch, when scrolling around and hitting like the boundary when lazy loading happens, you would notice that there's like a small delay.
Yeah.
It like freezes and then it continues scrolling smoothly again.
That's about the reflow of the...
Yeah, that or not just the reflow, but also that the framework needs to make certain checks to make sure that does it need to update or does it need to notify layouts that things have changed or not.
Okay.
So to answer the question, grid, we will not provide a grid component for Vaadin 7.3. You could probably do it yourself with some small tweaks.
But then again, for me, that sounds something that it's the difference between 7.3 and 7.4 in the framework. Otherwise, it's not so huge that it would be very easy to move forward to 7.4 version also.
Yes.
So that's at least our idea, that there will be no major API changes that make your life harder in that sense. Yes.
Do you have any more questions?
Yes, we have a lot of questions coming in the forum. Roel here is asking, is it possible to configure a grid to look like and work like a tree table? So basically this refers to hierarchy of some sort.
Yeah. Support for hierarchy is not included in the initial version. That's once again something that we left out to have something to release earlier. It is among the top things that we want to do after getting the initial release done. And also, I haven't tried this out in practice, but I think you can actually emulate the like tree table functionality if you would create just a renderer that shows those like expand and collapse
indentation.
things. Yeah, and then you need to also like on the fly insert and remove rows from the data.
Right.
Because that's also.
But that's supported.
Yeah. Actually, that's one thing that we have improved in Grid. That really like adding and removing data in the middle of like you have some rows on the screen and then you update that data or actually insert data in the middle there. That's like in table that basically caused everything to be reinitialized.
Right.
But then with Grid, it actually just like updates what's there and doesn't need to redo everything.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you basically have two answers to this question. No, you have to wait for the next version, or then you can implement something by yourself for the tree table.
It came to mind that you don't even need to like add and remove those rows. You can just use the filtering functionality to selectively like disable or make those rows go away.
Yeah. Sounds reasonable.
Did we have any more questions?
Do we have more questions in the forum? Let's check the forum. Not on the forum, but we had some questions beforehand, so let's go through those.
Okay.
Alexander, greetings to Alexander. When is the hierarchical grid going to land? Very
next
related
question,
one.
please.
It's a hard question, or we will take this later on.
Yeah, it's among the next things we want to do, but we have not yet made any plans for exactly when it will happen.
Yeah.
So
okay.
that's the answer to that
Okay.
question.
Yeah. All right. George has a special case of showing one table column as keyword in context. So this is hard to explain, but
Yeah, so
KWIC
yeah, so
is the concept, but we had a picture here. So
Yeah.
basically one word in the center and reflows on both sides of this one column.
yeah, luckily this question was presented in advance so that we could have a chance
checked this,
of checking up what keyword in context mean. To answer to George, I don't know how, or the other way around. If you can do it with HTML, you can do it with grid, because you can make a renderer that creates that HTML.
Right.
The challenge here is that right now I can't come up with any idea about how you could do that with HTML.
With HTML.
But I guess someone else has thought about this. I guess it's possible, but I can't tell exactly how it would be done.
Yeah. To me, it sounds like that you need some client-side logic there to add to.
Yes, you need some kind of client-side logic to position those texts.
Yeah. All right. Next question from Leon. I'm interested in styling a grid layout to create UI, not just display data. Okay, this is now talking about grid layout, not grid actually.
Yeah, so this can be quite confusing because there's like grid and grid layout. One is already implemented and has been in the framework for many years. That's grid layout, and grid layout is really for showing a user interface, showing like components.
Yeah.
Whereas grid is really for showing data, and lots of data with like scrolling and lazy loading and different or like structured data types. So this column only contains this data, whereas grid layout can have it so that like the same column, one row there's a button, the next row there's a text label or something like that.
Right.
So there's like this, there are different components.
Yeah, so they really are different components. I would think that the grid layout is really for, well, if you have a small amount of data, maybe it makes sense to put it in a grid layout and show labels there. That's for a few lines of. But if you have plenty of data like you usually have, then the grid or the table component is the way to go.
Yeah, and then the other way around, if you have like lots of interactive UI components, then you would either want to use grid layout, or then actually in the Vaadin directory there's this lazy loading layout.
Yeah.
That might be better if you have like many rows, but you
still
want
to optimize the number of UI.
If you still want more of a layout and less of a like data grid.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Then Rune was asking, will the editing on demand be different from how it works today? So
editing on demand here, I think, because there was actually some follow-up to that question, what it means is the table.set editable functionality.
Right.
That I guess it really goes back to the year 2002 with XSLTs and reloading the page whenever you do something.
Yeah.
Because there it made sense that you took all the data that was on the screen, make it all editable, and then the user can edit it all at once and press save, and then that data is updated. But today, when you are like scrolling, that feature is kind of not really optimal.
Yeah, from usability.
From a usability point of view, and also like technically there's lots of data to update and send back and forth.
Yeah.
So actually what grid does is that instead it lets you create like, it contains this already done UI for editing one row at a time. So by default, if the function is enabled for the grid, you can double click the row and then it like opens up or changes the contents of that row to like be editor controls, and then you can save or abort the edit.
Yeah.
And in that way, instead of editing all at once.
Yeah. But that's a nice pattern.
Yeah.
So.
And actually, this functionality is implemented using the same like underlying things as field group.
Yeah.
So you have like all this like converter factory and that kind of support, or converter factory and field factory. So by default, grid can actually create like sensible components based on the type of data you have.
Yeah.
So that's also improvement over the like set editable, where everything was just a text field where you edited the text string and nothing else.
Yeah. Okay. There was more questions coming in. Nelu was asking, is there any restriction on the type of widgets you can use in grid cell by renderer? So I think this is again putting a component inside the...
Yeah, components or widgets.
Yeah.
So as said, server-side components can't be put there as of now.
Yeah.
Client-side GUID widgets can be put there. Grid itself doesn't in any way restrict what you do. The only thing that you need to keep in mind is that every row has the same height. So it's only like makes sense for like buttons, text fields, those kinds of components. You don't... Technically it would work, but
yeah, it would look funny probably.
Yeah, you could have like this high rows and every cell contains a new grid.
Yeah.
But
okay, someone go and try that one.
Yeah, but still like there's no technical limitation, but there is this like user interface limitation that all the rows have the same fixed height.
Yeah. So basically very simple components with the similar sizing.
Yeah. So for instance, the example, a layout putting like two buttons besides each other, that works really well.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Good.
Was that all the questions
we had? I
think
that's more or less all the questions. So if you have more questions to Leif, good news, everyone. You can meet Leif there in Quit Create conference in January. So that will be in 2 continents, near San Francisco in Mountain View and in Munich. You will be talking about the same topic there.
Yes, I will go even more in depth about the like performance aspects of this. Not focus that much on like how you use grid, but more like what can you learn about how to make really high performance components.
Like the DOM manipulation performance on that.
Yeah, really like.
Okay. Low level hardcore.
Exactly.
Okay, sounds interesting. Quit Create is only 60 days ahead, so be quick and reserve your tickets for there. I think we have everything covered here, so I would like to say thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you.
And participating in the discussion. We will continue there in the forums. Thank you, Leif. And we will see you again.
Bye.
Bye.